Yesterday was a sad day for all of us in the fitness community. As I'm sure all of you know, John Meadows passed away. I originally thought not to make a video about this, of course, but I received a lot of questions, some about why I never had John on the show and whether I knew John personally. And I thought it may be worthwhile to make a video commending John and speaking about some of the great things that I knew about him. I'm going to make this video adless because I don't want to earn any revenue, of course, off discussing this. Before I begin, I wanted to comment on a couple of other things. I've seen a few videos about John, some of which annoyed me a little bit. I find it odd that when someone passes away, another person can make a video about how the passing away of that person affects them, or how it makes them consider their own mortality. This is not the way to live. If somebody has passed away that you care about, you should think about them. You should be feeling badly about their outcome, not thinking about how it relates to you. I think this is such a symbol of the degradation of society, Western society at the very least. It reminds me of a client I have whose mother is passing from cancer. And this young man, he has such a love of his mother. All he talks about is his worry about her. You know, he asked me, do you think, Leo, that my mother will still exist somewhere? Do you think that do you think that she exists, or do you think she doesn't exist anymore? All those questions are about her, not about the concerns of not having a mother at the age of 17 and how it's going to affect him personally. So that's one thing I wanted to comment on. The other thing I wanted to comment on is that I have seen a very nasty exchange with some kind of, he's a charlatan coach that claims he's the master of androgens. His name is Victor Black. I don't even want to mention his name to give him more attention here, but he's a horrible human being. Someone sent me screenshots from his page. He made a post about John Meadows passing. And someone commented there commending John, saying that John was maybe the only person that only made informative videos and never got involved in the drama, which is really quite true. Victor responded saying that, hey, it's much easier to do that when you have a team working for you and you're making more money and I don't know what, which is just throwing shade on someone for absolutely no reason. It's not true. John was the same way when he didn't have a team working for him historically, and there are many other YouTubers with large teams, like the best example is Greg Doucette, large team that gets involved in every piece of drama that he encounters. Having a larger team doesn't change your ethical code. It makes you more capable at doing what you want to do. So in Greg Doucette's case, he becomes more capable at talking about drama, and in John Meadows' case, he became more capable at doing the informative, morally responsible content that he made. So really, talking ill of the dead, especially when what you're saying is really not true, is a disgusting thing. Now, moving away from this negativity, in this video I'm going to talk to you about how I knew John. I'm going to tell you some things about what I knew about him, which speak to his incredible character and intelligence. And then I'll discuss what I think of his passing and death in general. First of all, I had known about John for many years, of course, as everyone else in the fitness industry had. I had seen his appearances on some other YouTube channels in group discussions, and I was always impressed by the way he conducted himself. He seemed to be somebody that stood for what was good, and even moreover, he actually seemed to follow the golden rule, which is never to say something that isn't constructive or positive. If you have nothing good to say, don't say anything at all. It's a very difficult rule to follow. I personally don't follow it, but I respect it in others because I know how difficult it is to follow and what that says about a person's character, really. Now, remember, after I began my YouTube channel, I had got into an argument with a client of John's named Fuad Abiaf, who actually he started the argument, threatening to punch me, and I responded in my usual aggressive manner for a while. And I remember when I was doing that, I thought, you know, the only unfortunate thing about this is that I probably will never get to know John Meadows. But it turned out, surprisingly, a few months later, John started following me on my Instagram. And I was really shocked to see that initially. And then every so often he would leave a comment on my posts, an encouraging comment. I later discovered he did this for many other smaller channels, being a beacon of light and hope and inspiration for us all. And this speaks to his character of looking out for the little guy and so on. When John had his heart attack, I think last year, I remember watching a video of his that discussed coenzyme Q10 supplementation. I had already finished my notes, or maybe it wasn't last year, I had already finished my notes on coenzyme Q10 for a video I was going to make, which I finally made recently. So I thought I could email them to him and they might be useful. In doing so, we started an exchange of emails that continued for a couple of months and only ended recently. I wanted to tell you a little bit about our exchanges over email without invading John's privacy, to commend him for his attention to detail, his knowledge of biology and health, and also to correct some of the mistakes other channels made. They described his removal of his colon as being related to the disease that caused his blood clot and his heart attack, and others connected it also to his pulmonary embolism. It is not actually related, and so we'll discuss that here. So what I did this morning was I just went through the emails and took a couple of notes. I'll take you through them. I think they're a little bit informative. Number one, how the exchange began is that I sent him my notes on coenzyme Q10, and he responded actually with a couple of other papers that I found informative. One was on phytochemicals used in heart disease, like what they call nutraceuticals, like supplements, how they may affect people in heart disease. And another one was about taurine's anti-inflammatory effect. As some of you may know, I take a gram of taurine 3 times a day. So immediately I realized we had similar thoughts on supplements. Now, there was one day where I sent him a paper on how statins may prevent people with colitis from developing colorectal cancer. In response, he told me he had never had colitis. He had what's called idiopathic myointernal hyperplasia of the mesenteric vein, which is a very rare disease. When I looked into it later, there have actually been only 33 accounts of it ever in case reports in the literature. It was first identified in 1991 by a pair of authors, and since then, very little has been learned about its etiology, meaning how the disease progresses, what causes it, and so on. It's thought to be associated with an increased blood pressure in the capillaries near the colon, where the increased blood pressure over time causes these capillaries to become arteries or veins. They enlarge them. And basically the disease mimics the person who has the disease will almost feel like they have colitis or Crohn's disease, but it's actually a cardiovascular disease that involves excessive growth of the blood vessels in the area. Thankfully, John lived in Ohio, where one of the greatest hospitals in the United States is the Mayo Clinic, and he was treated appropriately immediately for it. He said something actually in his emails that was a little bit haunting. I should read the quote to you. He said, "One thing about me, I never get sick, but when I do, I just almost die." He had a difficult life for sure with his health. Now, a couple of other notes for people that may be wondering, did John have like horrible effects on his heart? Did he have bad blood work? No. So, number one, he had only minor left ventricle hypertrophy, he told me, which I have myself. And almost all athletes have, or not athletes, but people who, train very hard and so on. Most people have a little bit of left ventricle hypertrophy, which is also an effect of steroids or high adrenaline signaling long term. He told me his ejection fraction of his heart was climbing, and he hoped that it would be able to recover significantly. And he had really positive outlook on that. He also had a very low calcium score. If I remember correctly, it was something around 15 or 18. Which, for those that don't know, calcium develops in your arteries after long periods in which you've had plaque. Usually 10 years later, as the plaque heals, it develops calcium. I don't know how much plaque he had, I never asked him, but he told me about the calcium of his own volition. Interestingly, when he got his heart attack, the first doctor he visited recommended that he get a defibrillator implanted in his heart immediately, sort of like what Dave Palumbo has. But he told me he was actually relieved that he got a second opinion, and other doctors encouraged him that it may be able to heal on its own. I don't know how much that played a role in his actual demise while he was asleep, because of course the pulmonary embolism can have an effect on the heart, and if you have a weakened heart, your heart may give up because of it. So I don't know enough about pulmonary embolisms to know the exact. Pulmonary embolism, by the way, is a blood clot in your lungs, which is what we've heard that John had. We don't even know that either. But anyway, I don't know that much about the pulmonary embolism etiology and how much it has to do with the heart, in particular how much a weakened heart can affect it and so on. He actually said, "I'm so glad I sought out further options and other doctors gave me hope I could recover." Now, he was also taking a statin like me. He was taking 10 milligrams of atorvastatin, which I was really impressed by. If you guys don't know, a lot of bodybuilders shy away from the use of statins and think of them as demonic interventions from doctors designed to cause their demise, when in reality they're the most life-saving cardiovascular medications around. He was also taking beta blockers, I think. In regard to his use of the statin, atorvastatin, he mentioned that he was closely following his HbA1c and fasting insulin levels. He wasn't doing the oral glucose tolerance tests, but he was just measuring fasting insulin, which is not as effective. But he was noticing that his insulin sensitivity was worsening slightly, one of the major effects of statins, and he was following this quite closely. He told me he didn't eat that much food after he retired a few years ago, so he was surprised that the insulin sensitivity was slightly worsening. Now, John started sending me his blood work a few months ago, and his blood work was excellent. With that in mind, I just want to mention, he didn't test like very niche biomarkers related to cardiovascular disease, like biomarkers related to inflammation in the arterial system and stuff like that. But on the regular metabolic panel, he had fantastic biomarkers. His C-reactive protein was minimized. His LDL cholesterol was very low. In fact, the only biomarker that I ever saw elevated was uric acid. And I remember when I saw this elevated, I emailed him asking if he was fasting. Because usually, for those that don't know, when you do extended fasts for like 3-4 days, sometimes your uric acid levels will elevate, which is one reason I take allopurinol when I fast, because high uric acid levels can have some negative impacts on cardiovascular disease. And he responded to me telling me that he has been periodic fasting. So that's how forward-thinking John was. He's probably, I guess, the first bodybuilding coach in North America to do extended periodic fast for health reasons. And the final exchange we had was actually, I was letting him know about the GLP-1 agonists, and I was curious if he had tried them in his athletes. And he had not heard about them before, so I referenced them to him and told him my favorite ones and so on. And I was looking forward to hearing an update from him about his experiences with bodybuilding clients trying GLP-1 agonists to lessen their hunger while they cut. But I didn't hear back from him, and maybe this was a month and a half ago or so. Now, as I mentioned, I always recognized, and I'm sure all of you do from a distance, John's incredible character. But in speaking with him through emails, what I really learned about that surprised me was how open-minded he was, how curious he was, and how genuinely interested in human health he was. I think he may have been the most knowledgeable bodybuilding coach in North America regarding human health and biology. He was very advanced. He was all into the fasting literature. He was serious about various supplements. He used statins on himself later in age and beta blockers. And I think he was starting to think about those drugs used for prophylactic treatment for bodybuilders earlier in their life. In general, I was very impressed by John's intelligence, open-mindedness, and character. And I thought that I should bring this up to all of you. Now, is John really dead? As some of you may know, I'm a religious man. I follow the religion of Spinoza, and I worship the architect of the universe, whose being you can see in the laws of physics and biology and so on. And I have some particular views that I might expand on here briefly. First of all, we are not the illusion of being, of a self that is unchanged through life. That is an illusion. You know, the Leo that you see here today is not the same Leo that existed 10 years ago. Every atom in my body has been recycled, and my thoughts and beliefs are a little bit different. So really, I have experienced, just as you have, many small deaths in my life. The more you develop in your life, or the more you change really, the more small deaths you experience, such that the young Leo, or whoever you are, the young you, is really no longer alive. So the illusion that we are living and we suddenly die, it's not really the case. Moreover, when we do die, our physical being is recycled in the universe. There is a limited amount of carbon in the universe, and at some point our being will become some other being. So this idea of us being a self that is distinct from others and dies suddenly, it's all really a little bit of an illusion. Second, men of gravitas and magnitude, like John Meadows, do not die. Their actions echo in the halls of eternity, infinitely. Not just in the content that they produce or the books they write or so on, but in the way that they influence others. The more somebody influences somebody else, the more that they live on after their death. And certainly John has influenced all of us, if not in education, then in terms of moral character and how one can conduct himself. And beyond that, John also has a family and offspring. And when a man has offspring, he lives on in those offspring that carry his genetic code as well as his teachings. So I would argue that John is not dead, and the way that we can keep John alive is by remembering the lessons we learned from him and remembering him. Moreover, those of us that can should do our best to support the legacy of John in terms of his children and his family. Not just now, but a decade from now. If you can't support them, please do. Anyway, I hope this discussion was informative for you guys. The main points are that John was very meticulous about his health. He was doing everything he could do to extend his life, and he did not really make mistakes there. Sometimes long time periods of damage to the body, which I've endured and many of us have endured because of our lifestyles in some way, whether knowingly or unknowingly, are difficult to reverse. But he did his best, and really nobody should take any of that away from him. Thank you guys so much for bearing with me. I'll see you next time.